first speaker for today is an incredible person, Dylan from South Africa. So again, please do check out their bio and their background. He's the MD Africa for the Advantage Group International. But my introduction today, I would also let you know that his background, he actually led Deloitte in South Africa. So please, you really just need to connect with him. You really do need to connect with him. He sits on boards and he sits on, when it comes to technology and innovation across the continent, he's somebody that really has his hands on the pulse of what's going on. And so I'll just stop right there because I'm just super excited to have him kick us off today. So Dylan, it's an honor to have you here. Thank you so much for saying yes. And we are so excited to have you speak to us. So yes, I'm going to stop sharing. You can kick this up. Okay, thank you.
All right, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. And for those in the East, good evening. Let me check. I think I've shared my screen correctly. So look, I've put together some slides just to kind of guide me and my thinking, my conversation. I think there's so many incredible speakers and so much to learn, and I've been learning through this process. But what I'm going to do really is just talk about some of the things that I'm seeing happening from a few of the initiatives I've been involved in. And I think it's important to state that there is so much happening. There isn't one single, how do we say, special silver bullet or pill that is going to solve everything. It's a multitude of factors. But let me just, I should have sorted this out so I can see correctly. Try and just confirm that you can hear me okay and you can see the screen.
Yes to both.
Okay. Wonderful. So to kick off, we are in a digital age. That means everything is expected immediately. I want to be satisfied wherever I am. This is whether I'm a consumer or in B2B. It's on demand, it's constant, and technology is a foundation of enabling this constant change in digital age. So we're seeing what we call the democratization through digitization and digitalization. So we talk about the 5 Ds, and different countries, different economies are different phases in that, going through the 5 Ds, and also different sectors are part of that. But what we're basically seeing is this significant shift in the way that we consider business and investment and trade being driven through digital. So what is this really all about? It's about future-proofing ourselves, our communities, our businesses, our countries, our regions, and our continent. For me, change the dynamic, change the game. This is critical, and this is the motto I've been kind of living by for the last few years, and what I'm really seeing happening in the continent. So I want to talk about a couple of things today. I'm talking about opportunity versus capital. I'm talking about the changing value equation that we're seeing in the relation dynamics in the traditional value chains and global value chains from producer, distributor, supplier, retail, and consumer, as well as the shifts in leadership and mental models. So I come from a background ex-Deloitte for the last 10 years. Just a correction there, I wasn't leading Deloitte in South Africa, but I was heading up strategy and operations for the consumer industry across sub-Saharan Africa. And I was working with all our counterparts across FMCG, retail, manufacturing, and through that got involved with WEF, UN, WTO, AU, and local organizations also. And for the past 4 years, I have recently stepped down. I was also chairman of the board of the African E-commerce Forum, where we're promoting a digital-led economy for the African continent. Through that, we are part of an advisory board representing Africa and making submissions to the WTO trade negotiations, specifically around digital trade and what that means for the private sector. So my passion is leadership and youth development in Africa. It's also around trade and investments, that's both inbound and outbound, and then specifically the growth and development of the digital economy. So not long ago, about 2 years ago, I was in Geneva, and I was very privileged to be invited by the UN Economic Commission to present at the World Investment Forum. And in that 3-day session, I got to meet the most incredible people and have amazing conversations. I was on a panel with Alibaba, with Vertex Holdings, the most active VC in the world, with Imyadar, which is Impact Fund out of eBay, as well as other venture capitalists from the US and Africa. And one of the key things that really stood out for me, and something that we raised in an investment forum lunch together with the World Bank, was that we need a paradigm shift in how we consider capital and opportunity relationship dynamics, specifically because of traditional global South, global North legacies. What does this mean? Well, what we saw and what I was seeing is around this legacy relationship that is existing in continents when it comes to capital and opportunity. I've also been in the US working with entrepreneurs. A week ago, I was sitting on an investor panel with entrepreneurs pitching from Ghana, Tanzania, Kenya, and Uganda. And still, it's the same challenge I'm seeing coming through. There's still an approach to the attraction of capital from a donor-based mindset. What does that mean? That means that I see incredible talent and opportunity and ideas happening in continent, but the way that we are articulating our attraction of capital is still based on a less purely commercial and more impact. Now, that doesn't mean that there's a huge role to play in impact, but the traditional means for capital to find opportunity has been around the commercial side of things. So there's two sides to this relationship, the capital and opportunity. So I'm challenging us from what we can do in continent, from articulation of the opportunity, and then we've got to look at the capital side. So it's a great statement that when I was talking to a Minister of Trade in Geneva, he said, Dylan, I know that you're focusing on Africa, but this is the reality. The continent is competing with the rest of the world for global capital flows, and capital flows towards opportunity. So it's a competition for opportunity to create the best value proposition to attract that capital. Okay, now we need to relook. What do we do? How do we consider that? So we need a narrative change. We need to encourage ourselves to move beyond this thinking that is unfortunately based in legacy colonial structures around the relationship with capital, of donor relationship, to empowering ourselves towards a commercial return on investment narrative. From the capital side, however, global capital has traditionally looked at opportunity based on strict criteria, historical criteria, the new age, the new normal, the digital era, and the opportunities in Africa don't have that same historical information. So as an example, the data, you might not have data sets for a business over 15 years that you can put together in creating an articulated value proposition to attract capital. Capital needs to rethink that, or they're going to lose out on the opportunities that are on continents. Public-private partnerships are critical to this. So government needs to help in creating that enabling environment for the attraction of capital and for opportunity to be able to properly articulate itself and have access to the platforms where it can present those opportunities. And I think that is significant, and we are seeing changes happening, and which is, for me, amazing. The other thing, though, that is also quite interesting is when I look at, I was just reading the two venture capital reports for Africa and South Africa last week. And traditionally, we've always associated investments in continents around infrastructure development or resource-based. There are, of course, opportunities still existing in those sectors. However, we're seeing a shift away from a resource dependency when it comes to capital flows. This also talks to the growth of the digital economy and how that is filtering down into the continent for opportunities in digital economy, e-commerce, ed tech, agri-tech, fintech, legal tech, and how we can now leverage that to scale not only in country, but across region and continent, and take that opportunity to the rest of the world. So we're seeing a resource focus shift. The question is, can capital, international capital, adjust enough from a traditional view around how to invest in resources, moving towards digital economy investments? Part of the leadership paradigm that I talked about is fundamental to this. And this is a quote that I absolutely love. It's from Flight of the Buffalo, written in 1994, which if you haven't read, I highly suggest giving a read. It's a very quick read. It says change is hard because people overestimate the value of what they have and underestimate the value of what they may gain by giving that up. That is significant. I've seen this time and time again with the leaders of companies and with government officials basing decisions on individual paradigms. So we talk about navel gazing, we talk about myopic points of view. This is a significant challenge, and it's often fear-based because we only know what we've gone through, and we're fearful of a future that we don't know. However, we need to challenge ourselves in the way that we make decisions going forward, and not depend on fear and based on narratives and paradigms that are quite narrow. That encourages us to change our worldview and talks to considering ourselves in a global competitive landscape and a systems thinking approach. And I'll show something just now that really talks to this. So talking about this leadership, and this is the digital paradigm for me, which is absolutely brilliant. And it talks about achieving digital maturity. It is an MIT Sloan and Deloitte report, but it talks to how we are still challenged in adapting to the new normal of digital. Now we can also talk about the new normal of this global pandemic and how that has also brought the future forward by 5 to 10 years. So our adaptability and willingness to adapt has to be accelerated. So 80% of executives believe digital will disrupt their industry. However, the number of those individuals that believe it and actually acting on it is significantly smaller. So what are we seeing? We're seeing that 80% of these organizations don't have the right leaders to transform the digital mindset of a company. That 6 times those leaders are not getting the new digital skills they need within the organization that are going to maintain longevity in the organization because they are not giving them what they need. I ran a session in East Africa, the East African business community, and 22 CEOs and government representatives. And I was looking at advanced manufacturing for development of East Africa. And one of the things that stood out to me is every single CEO there said, we are aware of the advanced manufacturing technologies and techniques. However, we are not willing to make the capital investment because we do not believe that we have the talent and the skills who can serve this new digital technology. So we need a push and a pull process here. We need the investment into advanced technologies and digital transformation from leaders who are brave enough to do it. But we need support in terms of upskilling the talent base to support this new technology. And it is there, the opportunity is there. It's just who is going to take the boldest step forward. So how are we responding to this change? Are we moving from intent to action, as I mentioned? Are we adapting sufficiently? Are we holding our leaders to account, not only at a government level, not only at a regional level, but at a business level, at a community level, at a family unit level? And are we driving a new narrative around collaboration in a new normal, especially because we know that policy lags behind innovation. So while we need public-private partnerships, we cannot have the private sector depending solely on government to create the environment. It is a bit of a chicken and egg process, but we know that the policy innovation, which is with positive intent by governments, and I've been working on some policy development in the SADC region, is there. It's there to uplift business. But because of the processes, the inherent processes, it is often too slow for innovation. Now, the 2 graphs I've got there, they from excellent reports, you can look them up. One is from the 2019 Africa Tech Venture Capital Report. And why I pulled it out for me was the increase in investments. I started having this conversation in 2015 globally. And we are seeing the narrative change. And this is wonderful to see the increase. I mean, moving from 1.1 billion US dollars in 2018 up to over 2 billion in 2019. That is a significant increase. If we look to the right, that's from a specifically South African venture capital report for 2019. And what I wanted to highlight here is back in 2015, 2016, we're still very much looking at the acquisition market. I was talking to a venture capital company in New York who had a significant amounts of liquidity, cash available to invest specifically in Africa. There's 2 Nigerians who ran this fund. They could not find an opportunity that met their threshold. So they were looking at a minimum $50 million threshold. And this is also where capital is starting to rethink how they engage in African opportunity. The startup capital investments increasing to almost 46%, nearly 50% of the investments in VCs, from VCs and other investors, for me is a great signal of how capital is starting to realize it needs to change its approach to opportunity in continent. Right. Is that, I've got a pinging noise?
You're good.
Okay. Just hold me, keep me honest with time.
Keep going.
So I had a fantastic conversation literally 2 days ago with Jeff Eugene Chen, who is from the Gordon Institute of Business Science. He's part of the faculty, full-time faculty at the Training Institute in South Africa. And we were talking about the whole challenge that is coming out with the TikTok ban potential, Tencent being targeted, etc., from the US. And we're talking about what this means. And as a result, what has China done that they've seen such a growth, and what can we learn from in Africa? Now, this I'm going to try to pick out the positive things. There are so many things that we also don't want to go into. But I've taken his quote here that he said I could use. So 2 major factors, specifically around digital trade, and I'm using e-commerce in this perspective, is government support and culture. So yes, government support is critical to create an enabling environment, but the culture is even more important. We recently made a submission around tax policy that government had implemented positive intent aimed at supporting local business development. We identified what we called unintended negative consequences, that it was going to repress international investment. So essentially in-continent, multi-country investment by creating too high obstacles to trading cross-border. So the initial intent, support local. The longer term intent was actually creating an environment where we're not going to trade cross-border. The delayed gratification philosophy for me is also significant. We've seen this with the Continental Free Trade Agreement, incredible initiative. We're all fully supportive of it. And I know this has been talked about a lot, but part of that is saying we want to put in place initiatives and the framework that is going to seek success in the future. And if we only have a short-term view, we're going to keep doing the same thing, expecting different results. The other interesting thing from China is the whole concept about the fast eats the slow. So we can also get caught up too much in decision-making processes and bureaucracies that forget that we need to get to market, because that is what makes the consumers happy. And as a result, the consumers are happy in the context of digital economy, business is going to be happy, investment's going to be happy. So we need to see how we can unlock the challenges for speed to market, because I think we are losing out there. Other one is about dreaming big and grow exponentially. I think this is fantastic because it talks about the psyche, a historical psyche in Africa. There's amazing companies I've been talking to that are starting to go pan-African and actually are really looking to invest in India and LATAM. I think this is wonderful. It's a culture we need to be driving from the grassroots up. We need to realize that African ideas and concepts can be taken around the globe. And lastly, this is also critical, they employ the smartest people. They're willing to learn from other markets if they don't believe they know enough. And this is a challenge that I found also with the global South, global North dynamic, is the one tendency for the global North to bring across a message that can be condescending to us in the global South, and us as the global South to also put up our boxing gloves when we engage with the global North, because we're so used to being defensive. We are worried about resource extraction and not getting the benefit for our citizens in continents. However, we have to try and find a better playing field that is going to help us win at a faster pace. I'm not going to go into each of these slides, but I'm talking here very much around the picture of the digital economy based on what I've been talking about through the digital opportunity. Now, this is taken from a MasterCard Foundation report, and I think it really articulates where we can look at in this opportunity beyond the resource-based traditional areas. And it's an emerging play. We've been talking about it for a few years, but we're starting to see inroads, and specifically as the continent becomes more connected. Of course, our youth dividend, we believe, is a significant advantage, but we stand a significant risk also if we do not educate and bring that youth into economically active citizens. So for me, if you look at it, over 500 billion, this is B2C, opportunity by 2030, just in e-commerce. That is a significant opportunity. We can capture little bits of that. Now the question is where to find the investment opportunities, and to what extent are African organizations and companies going to be able to take advantage of this opportunity versus international organizations coming and taking the largest share of the pie. And that has all got to do with how we collaborate, again, from a private-public sector partnership, and how we engage responsibly with our investments and where we allocate it, ensure that we driving those returns back in continent. So I love the 4 scenarios here, and I just want to focus on this for a second, because this talks to a whole lot of areas, and specifically talking e-commerce, but I think it's got relevance in other areas. You go upwards to the right, and from a consulting perspective, we always say you want to be upwards and to the right. That is the ideal scenario 1. We have a digital social compact. We have global and local frameworks are working together to accelerate cross-border commerce, as well as national digital commerce, and mitigate some negative outcomes. I'll give you an example. A couple of years ago, I was very privileged to be part of the SADC Ministerial Summit, so the 15 member state summit, and I was a private sector representative, 15 of us there to submit projects that we had put together around infrastructure development, digital development, agriculture, and energy development in the region. And what we realized, and 2 things that really came out of that. One, through those 15 countries, we had a company that's trying to move a container of goods. That container of goods, to move through 3 countries in 1 week, would need to fill in 265 paper-based forms. Now, while it's a regional trade agreement and trade zone, the implementation of those agreements was lacking at the border posts. So there's a significant opportunity. How do we improve this? There is a digital proposal on the table, not only at a regional SADC level, but at multiple regional levels and at Continental Free Trade Agreement level. However, the challenge comes down to who is going to benefit most from this. How do we still generate revenues from tax revenues and capture those revenues in country for movement of goods cross-border? And that's still something that's being worked on, but a significant impediment to the growth of trade of goods cross-border in country. So I want to just talk to one last example. How am I doing on time? Toyin?
Yes, you're good.
Okay. I met with a company called ShopSoko. Absolutely incredible story. Based out of Kenya, but they've just expanded into Silicon Valley. And what they did, and I'm using this as an example because for me, it's an example of something that's grassroots, but it's taking an African product international. So they realized that the vendors on the side of the road were selling bone and brass jewelry. And they were basing their sales on a daily basis on people walking by and buying it at almost nothing. What ShopSoko did is said, let us create an ecosystem where we will handle the distribution and sales of your products. So we'll create a sales funnel for you so you can go and have security in terms of your demand. You'll be able to plan on what you're going to purchase and what products you can put together. Bring it to us. We will clean it up, package it, and market it to the rest of the world. ShopSoko, at the time that I talked to them, 96% of their revenue was dollar-based from 17 international countries. They had taken a product which is selling for next to nothing on the side of the road, cleaned it up through a scientific process, packaged it and marketed it internationally. Now, while that is great on the front end, on the back end, what they've done is also empowered those sellers to then be able to invest in secure production facilities through containers, which they helped finance for them. And then they would then be able to hire the people that move off the roads and start building their own employee base. So security of supply, empowerment of individuals, and specifically women in this regard, taking African products, selling to the rest of the world. And how do they enable it? They enabled it through e-commerce. And in the back end, they created a mobile-based ERP system where these vendors, through their cell phone, could manage and track sales and demand through ShopSoko and supply accordingly, which I think is an absolutely amazing example for me. This was when I visited their factory, and I say their factory at the time. Their factory was a house, and in the back of the house, they had the chemical side, and they were employing 25 Kenyans at the time full-time, and then had over 220 vendors on their books that they were working with, and they continue to grow. And for me, this is a fantastic story of the marriage of digital disruption technology platforms with an African story, an African product that has a premium value internationally. And to end, my final story, given this digital transformation, I had the huge privilege of meeting Sophia, who is the most advanced artificial intelligence in the world. And she was being interviewed by the head of the UN in Geneva. And she's being asked all these questions about what she's doing, how she's learning, etc. And there was one question that really stood out for me, and especially in the context of digital transformation and where we're going as a business. And this might sound counter to what I've been saying, but I think it's something we need to always be aware of. So Sophia was asked, Sophia, if there's anything in the world that you could do, what would it be? In my mind, I was certain she was going to talk to world peace, alleviation of poverty, things like that. But this was Sophia's response. If there's anything in the world that I want to do, it is to learn to dance. And for me, that was incredible. The smartest artificial intelligence in the world wants to connect with the most fundamental basics of what it means to be human. A sense of feeling, passion, and enjoyment. And what that really talks to is how the more digital we become, and the more we go on this journey, the more we need to ensure we maintain a human-to-human connection. So, to sum up, change the dynamic, change the game. In the opportunity versus capital relationship, we need to have an African narrative shift and a paradigm shift in the way we approach that from both sides of the equation. When it comes to global and local value chains, we know that the production, distribution, supplier, retailer, consumer value chain is completely being disrupted, with producers, distributors going direct to consumer, retailers becoming banks, distributors becoming suppliers, and suppliers investing in backward integration becoming producers. The digital economy disruption and opportunity is significant. And then from leadership and mental models, we need to realize a new legacy in the way that we approach how we do business in country with our citizens and how we engage with global capital, and ensure that the best opportunity is rising for capital to remain in country and in continent for a successful future. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. So, wow, that was wonderful. I do have, the first question would come from me. Back in, I believe, 2018, I was invited to New York for a meeting with the president of South Africa. And in that meeting, he was addressing US investors, and some of the top US-based investors in South Africa had the opportunity to also share what they were doing and how they were investing in South Africa. One of the things that came up, and I think you also mentioned it, was the shortage in technology skills, right? To support the emerging technology that the investors were trying to bring to South Africa, as an example, was that we're facing challenges as we're running our companies, as US-based companies investing in South Africa. They were able to have this conversation with the president, Ramaphosa, to say, there's a shortage of talent to support what we're bringing in. And, the president acknowledged that. And he did try to say some of the things they were doing. But I think with everything you've talked about, you and I, we've worked with the biggest brands in the world. We know the level of excellence and expertise and competency that is required to perform at that level. So the question I have is, how does Africa get there from a talent standpoint?
Yeah, it's a significant challenge. So, I mean, I'm part of an initiative called Conscious Leadership, and we got together and we had, for example, the CEO of Unilever is a huge supporter of it. We had a couple of ex-government stalwarts and other captains of industry around saying, how do we create the future Africa we want? And what we were actually doing was calling for a state of emergency in education, and not only in Southern Africa, but in other regions. But let's start with Southern Africa. Because by calling for a state of emergency, it empowers governments to make certain interventions that currently are not possible simply because of the legacy systems that are there. So we need to look at it at all levels of education. So the foundation years, up to 6 years, which is incredibly important. And then beyond that, because these are the generations to come. If we keep failing now, we're not going to have the talent pool that we need in 20 years' time when the opportunity in Africa is really going to peak. Now, what do we do? That's a tough thing. I think there is significant opportunity in EdTech. So we're seeing some changes. I was talking to an EdTech company 2 weeks ago, in fact, and they've taken mobile-based learning to the communities. And I think this is where we're starting to see some changes. We're seeing generations that are engaging with education through digital platforms that the elder generations haven't before. And it means you can learn anywhere, anytime, and have connectivity to mentors and educators anytime, anywhere. And this is going to change. The challenge is, how do we accelerate that and scale it to really see impact?
Absolutely. And in my mind, how do you scale that would be teaching people how to fish, not just giving them the fish. Meaning, how do we infuse a culture of learning? Because one thing that's, from my own personal training is, you can do anything you want to do if you know how to go find the information that will teach you how to do what you want to do. I think if we can crystallize that mindset, information is abundant, right? Information is abundant. There are open universities, there are content out there. I think it ties to something you talked about, culture. There's the policy side, government enabling environment, but we don't talk enough about the culture of learning. And one of the things that I've seen is that there's still a damage that has been done to Africa from the colonial era, where the mindset of, we will do the work for you, you just sit back, we would manage your resources for you, we will bring you everything you need, all you need to do is sit where you are. So you find that mindset permeates and keeps people back, in the sense of, people are back there sitting down and expecting aid, foreign governments, individuals to fly and come and solve challenges that is right there in their community. And it starts from expecting central government. I like what you talked about, because it's the same thing I say within private sector. You said it so well in terms of saying that policy is usually behind private sector. Unfortunately, the private sector on the continent is leaning primarily on the government to lead. That blows my mind. Blows my mind. So talk about that.
Well, we see, and you're actually seeing the differences in countries that are taking a different view on leadership from what it means in their role to create enabling environments. I mean, I had a very 2 minutes with the Minister of Trade from Uganda, and one of the things that he said to me they'd put in place was a digital economy plan already for for their country. We have, you know, Kenya, who are leading in some areas around enabling environment for tech developments. Yes, you can argue, and depending on where you're looking at it, you can argue from different angles at their challenges, but realizing that we need to dive into it. There isn't a specific answer. There isn't this is the only way to do it. It's unprecedented. We have to accelerate it and learn while we're doing, so that we can put in policies as we learn and not work in a way that we believe we have to do the policies ahead of everything. And that is a limiting approach. I mean, there's an incredible example I had just from a continental relationship engagement. That's a cross-border engagement. I was talking to a company in Rwanda, and the CEO was asking me about how I could help facilitate the scaling of his business. He had already invested in West Africa, and he was scaling and wanted to go into Central Europe. And he had investors from Switzerland. So Rwanda and Switzerland generally have a very good relationship. And he was battling with sufficient skills as a tech business. He wanted to set up an office, an operational office in Cape Town, where he believed there's enough development skills to service the expansion project of the company. That would be a 35-person strong business in country to serve and grow the rest of the continent. His alternative was going to Geneva. We tried to help him out. He could not set up shop in Cape Town because of Rwandan, South African trade relations at that time. He couldn't get a business visa. He has gone and ended up setting up shop in Geneva and hired people in Switzerland to now serve the expansion of an African company across the continent. So look, there's also examples on the other end where we're seeing great things happening out of development communities, not only in Nigeria and Kenya, where we're seeing development culture. So when I say development culture, I'm talking about tech developers and training that are demonstrating that we have the skills to compete with the rest of the world. Yeah. But as you said, we're not used to promoting and packaging ourselves in the same manner that the Western or European world is used to. And I think we do ourselves a disservice sometimes, because we're used to thinking that we are inferior. And I think that is as you said, is also a legacy of the colonial mindset, which as much as we try to shake it, it still rears its head, unfortunately. But at the same time, by recognizing it, we're starting to see an awakening, especially in the youth, who are going, well, actually, why can't I? Mm-hmm. Why not? And I think that's incredible. And as leaders on the continent, we need to help nurture and help that kind of mindset flourish.
Wow, thank you so much. This is a fascinating topic, and I really do want us to continue this conversation on the trade platform. And I'm looking at time. I want us to quickly shift to our next speaker. And basically, our next speaker actually embodies what we just talked about. Inyabode is just an incredible individual who has not only solved global challenges, but when you talk about human capital with the work he did with Andela,